ride with me to the other clans and we will defeat the sky people.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, hello, hello out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, where we talk about key elements of horror and science fiction movies and those little things that lift them or at least distinguish them a bit sometimes from the average genre fare. If you are joining us for the first time, you already know this. If not, and you're joining us again? No, I said that backwards. I always fuck this up. If you're joining us for the first time, that's why I said that. If you're returning, then you already knew it. But I also wanted to add, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, David and I do this blind. We don't stress this enough, and I think that it's something that we should stress because there are so many scripted podcasts out there, and we don't want to be scripted. So we watch these movies on our own, then get together and discuss them first breath. So they are fresh in our minds, and neither one of us know what we're going to say to each other. And speaking of which, David Horton is my co-host, and he is right here. How are you doing, David?
Yes, I'm doing well. I'm glad you said that because it's a conversation between the two of us each week. And we don't even have bullet points of what we're talking about. We have a basic setup that we try to mimic or close to mimic.
It's like every episode outline.
But that's just placeholders of cast. Let's talk about cast. Let's talk about scenes, that sort of thing. But we don't talk ahead of time or plan anything. And that sometimes is, I guess, maybe confusing or rambling. But I kind of like that. That's part of our personalities anyway. But I normally, part of one of those headers that we have is what you do in your genre week. So I'm usually the science fiction guy. Although there are times when I have to do horror just because it's the only freaking things that are out.
You have a horrific background.
I do.
Even though today is a science fiction film.
I do. But, and sort of that's a good segue for what I want to talk about, which really it was a sort of what did you do in your genre week, but it wasn't a movie. I actually went and shot a television episode. Oh. So I think I've shared before that a lot of the episodic true crime stories that you see on like ID or Discovery or other cable networks, a lot of those episodes or a lot of those series themselves are primarily shot in Knoxville, which is near where I live. And my agent called and said, "Hey, we've got this role. Would you mind coming down to do it?" It was very interesting. The series I had never heard of before. It's called Storm of Suspicion. It's the name of the series. And it's not one of the typical ones on one of those other channels. It's from the Weather Channel. It's a true crime series that's on the Weather Channel. Anyway, so that episode is probably out by the time this airs, whenever this airs. But I got to play an older gentleman who is from Boone, North Carolina. And it was this horrible crime that took place where the entire family was murdered by these killers. They broke in during a snowstorm and they killed the father, the wife, and the son. And you would have liked it because we got to have makeup to be garroted. So we were garroted and strangled. And our bodies end up in a bathtub, drowned.
Oh my God. Bathtub. Does Jim Cantore run in a raincoat saying there's a hurricane coming?
I was saying, does he narrate this? And they were saying, no, he doesn't. I was going, okay. But yes, so you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I did 2 days of that this week. So I got to shoot for 2 days, lots of different setups, lots of stuff. It takes place in 1972 and also in the 50s when the couple first met and everything else. It it's a lot of fun. I've done quite a few of these little reenactments, and that one was fun.
Oh, fun. You're going to send me some of those. I want to see them. I want to see your
Yeah.
dead body.
There are several times I get to play the dead body. I guess I just look like a victim.
Excuse.
What about you? What are you doing genre-wise? Anything scary?
Well, genre. You know, I always tend to stumble into the platform Shudder, and this week
Yes.
I've been trying to go back in time a bit with Shudder and look at some older movies, and I decided to revisit this one because I haven't seen it in a while. It is called Ginger Snaps.
Oh, the two girls that are werewolves or something?
Well, one of them is. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a little over 20 years old. I think it came out in like 2001 or so. And I was never a big fan of this movie. It gets high markings on Rotten Tomatoes. And I mean, even before Rotten Tomatoes, way back when, I always heard positive things about this movie in Fangoria and other places. And it just doesn't really connect with me. I was trying to figure out why. And I think I just don't really like werewolf movies that much. I mean, there are two that stick out that I like. And those are American Werewolf in London and The Wolfman. And both of those have strong tragic elements. So I'm wondering if that's why I like them better.
I like, I mean, as far as werewolves go, there's another one that came out, I think, around the same time called, I think, Dog Soldiers. It's the name of it. Rowie liked that one a lot. And it was basically army guys that were a werewolf-like platoon.
I think that's directed by the guy that did The Descent, Rob something.
Yes.
I can't think of his name.
From what I remember, Ginger Snaps, though, was really, I didn't care for the script that much. They tended to not play up the tragedy of it and play it much more of like
there is
dawning
tragedy.
Awakening story kind of thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a feminist empowerment story, which I think is why a lot of critics like it. And I can understand that because at the time we certainly needed a little bit more women represented. But it has tragic elements. It does not have a happy ending. And this is going to sound racist, but it's Canadian. So I wonder if maybe that's another reason why it doesn't jibe with me a little bit.
Maybe
because things are a little foreign to me. It was directed by John Fawcett, who's pretty much a Canadian television director, and he's done good stuff. He's done Orphan Black. He did Queer as Folk. So, I mean, he knows what he's doing. It was written by Karen Walton, who basically did a lot of the same shows. So they worked together before. It stars Emily Perkins, Catherine Isabel, and Chris Lemche, and Mimi Rogers. All of a sudden, Mimi Rogers was in there. I was like, oh, there's a familiar face. She plays the mother of these sisters.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And it is about two sisters. They're outcast. They're kind of morbid. They're always filming ways. They're always faking their deaths in like videos. Their names are Ginger and Bridget. Ginger gets her first period late in life. She's attacked by a werewolf as a result, I guess, because the werewolf could smell her. And, of course, her wounds miraculously heal and something's not right. And Bridget, her sister, is trying to save her life, basically, before things start spiraling out of control because she's a werewolf, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend it. I think that it definitely deserves to be watched, especially if you like werewolf films. But to me, it doesn't rank as high as it does with other folks. But it is on Shudder for those of you out there that are curious.
Interesting. You mentioned two movies. I would agree. American Werewolf is good. I also did like the very first Underworld. I think it was called Underworld, the one with Kate Beckinsale.
It's been a minute, but I know what you're talking about.
It's predominantly a vampire movie, but lichens or werewolves become a part of it. And I kind of like that. That kind of goes back to that old Masquerade the Game from White Wolf that we used to play, the role-playing game. And the big thing about there's always been a war between the lichens and the robots. Kindred. The robots. Yes, the robots are evil.
That's like based on a game or a comic or something. I can't remember. I confuse it with the Resident Evil movies, Underworld and Resident Evil.
Oh yeah, because it did get that same kind of franchise feel,
and they came out like at the same time or something. I don't know.
Female in tight clothing being the lead in every one of them. Yes.
Mhm.
So sort of thing. Yes. But anyway, so yeah, you got to watch some werewolves.
Yeah. And there's werewolves on the moon, I hear.
No, there's not werewolves on the moon. However, there are surprises awaiting us on the moon.
Lots.
We are going to the moon, and we are covering this week a movie from 1964. It's called The First Men in the Moon, not The First Men on the Moon, not The First Moon Men, not First Men. First Men is our First Man. I think it's another movie. Don't get those confused. This is called First Men in the Moon. It is based on an H.G. Wells novel of the same name, directed by Nathan Duran, starring Nigel Neal. I'm sorry, written by Nigel Neal and Jan Reed, of course, based on H.G. Wells. It stars Edward Judd, Martha Hyer, and Lionel Jeffries. And that's really the three principal leads in it. You could actually do this as a pseudo stage play with just the three of them, sort of thing. But a brief synopsis or a little story about it, and pardon me if I'll get excited because I really do like this movie, but again, it's based on H.G. Wells' story. They do take a few liberties in it. The principal one being that there is no Catherine in the novel. She does not go to the moon with them, and none of that.
I love that you've read it because I don't know anything about it. About the book. That is.
And basically, you have bookends for this particular story, which you and I both like bookend stories, and if they're done well and everything. This one begins with a UN joint space mission to the moon, and it's, again, 1964. We as humans hadn't been there yet. So we are, excited to have a Russian, a Spanish person, an American, obviously someone from England, and they are all part of this UN joint task force to go to the moon. They land on the moon, and within a few minutes of landing there,
werewolves
find werewolves there. Yes.
Sorry, I just couldn't resist.
They find a British flag and a handwritten note saying that someone has claimed this territory for Her Majesty Queen Victoria from
it is 1899.
And so back on Earth, members from NASA and the UN space team rush to find supposedly the writer of this note. They end up finding him in an elderly retirement home where people kind of avoid him because of his mad ramblings about the moon. And he proceeds to tell them the story. Most of the bulk of the movie is told in story flashback, but the flashback is basically we're following Arnold Bedford. Arnold is a kind of an aspiring playwright who's a little bit of a con man sort of thing. He's lost a lot of money and he's in debt and he's trying to get out of it. He's in love with Kate Callender and they would love to get married. She would really love to get married. He's kind of hesitant because, he has no money. He moves into a cottage that he inherited kind of from his family. And next door is a very eccentric gentleman called Joseph Cavor or Cavor. She says Cavor a lot, so there's lots of pronunciations. Cavor's an eccentric inventor, and he has invented something that he calls Cavorite, which is a metallic paste that defies gravity. Naturally, Arnold Bedford, being somewhat of a con man, says, how can we make money off of this? How can we use it? Maybe we could coat boots with it and make them, people walk on water and that kind of stuff. And no, Cavor has his own plan. He wants to go to the moon. So they end up through happenstance with Kate, all three of them arriving on the moon, only to find that it is already occupied by Selenites, a group of little insectoid creatures who kidnap them, almost take their ship away,
pushy.
and put them in kind of a dangerous situation. They eventually, Catherine and Arnold Bedford return to Earth. Cavor stays on the moon. And Arnold Bedford is the one who is telling us the story. And he's terrified that these UN astronauts are going to go down and be captured by the Selenites. And instead, when they get there, the Selenite culture has collapsed, it's falling apart, and it's all in ruins and everything else. And he has this great little capping last line of, Cavor always did have a bad cold, or did have a terrible cold. And so when we get to Keys, I'm sure we'll be mentioning that line a little bit. Had you seen this movie before?
I did not even know this movie existed.
Really? Okay, so I'm very, very curious to know what you think.
I think it could have been called First Men Inside the Moon.
Yes.
Because they do go in the moon. That's why I guess he called it that. This movie feels like a kid movie to me.
Okay. Interesting.
I have various keys that kind of jibe with that theory. It's a silly movie. It's almost, I keep thinking of Monty Python because it's British and it's silly, and some of the concepts are it's not hard science fiction. I guess you would call it fantastical science fiction. Is that?
Well, it's essentially science fiction, but science fiction based on the time when it was written.
Yeah.
So at that time, when Jules Verne and H.G. Wells were writing their novels and everything, we didn't have submarines. We didn't have spaceships, of course. We barely had freaking, planes, really. And so there were assumptions about different things, the first of which is that there was life on Mars. We felt that those red things on Mars were probably highways. And then they later on decided, no, maybe they're canals where waterways, in between the cities.
Right.
There was a belief that since we didn't really know, we had not even launched an object into space in the 1800s. We thought that there was something in between the planets. And at that time, they were calling it ether, but they felt that it was almost like water. And so you could sail on this ether between the planets and the sun and everything else. They also believed that the moon had an atmosphere, that all planets have atmospheres, and it was all oxygen atmosphere. So there were, there's oxygen on Venus, there's oxygen on Mars, there's oxygen.
Well, now they wore helmets until they got inside the moon.
Those were the assumptions at the time. By 1960, I'm talking about the novel. So when the novels were written.
Okay.
Remember, a precursor or a great, just a little small key for this is one of the very first movies ever made, which was based on this same sort of story, which was shooting a cannon to the moon. And remember, it was Méliès's movie. I cannot remember the title of it right now, unfortunately.
From Earth to the Moon.
I think it's From the Earth to the Moon. Yes.
Yeah.
Black and white, semi-animated. When the bullet-shaped thing just hits the moon.
It goes in the
eye.
moon's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those were the assumptions at the time in the early turn of the 20th century, sort of thing. By 1964, naturally, we knew a lot more. So they adapted the novel, because in the novel, they don't wear spacesuits at all. They walk around on the moon because it has an atmosphere. So they added the bath escape, the diving helmets for to have oxygen on the moon. However, it was 1964, so they didn't really know a lot about space. So they didn't know that if you didn't have gloves on your hands, they would swell up and freeze and probably explode just from internal pressure and break off as soon as you touched anything. So yes, so they kind of didn't understand all the science, but they did make changes to the science. I did want to add, for kind of a historical reference, so at the time, the novel was written in 1901. So he set this 2 years before the time when he wrote the novel, supposing that these things had happened, sort of thing. This story.
He's very optimistic.
Naturally, he was. I think both Verne and Wells were. That's what made them such incredible fantasists, if you want to say fantasy science fiction rather than practical science fiction. But Jules Verne, but no. So one of the good things was C.S. Lewis loved this novel, and he said it was a huge influence on his life. It was, I guess, a key for him in his writing and telling fantastical stories and using your imagination in ways you hadn't thought of before. He said it was the greatest novel of the genre at the time in 1901. Jules Verne, however, hated this novel. He actually told Wells that Cavorite and the whole idea of this liquid substance that defies gravity was fake science, and he should stick to real technology and real science rather than making stuff up.
I kind of agree.
Well, I think it's kind of fantastically cool, though. It's a unique element, the same way that, Verne at the time had written 20,000 Leagues, which was about a metal ship that could be under the water. Nobody believed in that. That wasn't going to happen. Sort of thing.
Well, but it did. And in this movie, they have a anti-gravity paste that you put on an object. And not only does it lift you off the planet and through space, it takes you directly to the moon. Like, there's no way you can steer it. It just happens to land on the moon.
Yes. And I'm curious
the problems I have with it.
I'm curious if in the original screenplay they didn't have something, because, they do have a short scene where she turns a knob and it opens one of the shutters, which throws them off course towards the sun. And he has to correct it. In the novel, he's course correcting all the time, but he's using visual to course correct, which, truth be told, so did several of our astronauts. They didn't have a computer on autopilot to get to the moon. They would have to visually change course and hit retros and hit rockets to keep themselves on a trajectory toward the moon. So in theory, I sound like I'm defending it. I'm defending it just because saw it when I was a kid. That was my first time seeing it. Ironically, as a child, it meant a lot to me. Science fiction, go to the moon, little bug people that were cool. And then you had a scary bug guy that was behind a big jewel. And so I loved I kept this secret for, 60 years, and never told anyone that I had gone to the moon. I kind of liked that subtext underneath it.
I like the mystery element of them finding the flag.
Yes, the great teaser. Great teaser, great hook. Yes, I do. Now, I will say that one of your caveats about it, I kind of agree with, especially watching it again. I had not seen this probably in 10, 12 years. It is overly humorous in places, and mostly that is Lionel Jeffries and his delivery. But a lot of that was added by the producer. The original screenplay written by Nathan Duran, written by Nigel Keel, who you may recognize him from we've already covered one of his
Quatermass and the Pit.
Quatermass, yes. And not only that movie, he was responsible for that entire BBC series. That was his deal.
That was his baby altogether. The Quatermass concept was all him. Yeah.
And so imagine that kind of drama that he put into that series and those movies in this. That's the original screenplay. But when Schneer, the producer, got it, he said it's too dramatic. It needs humor. It needs to be a lighter.
See, I think that's where they screwed up. And I agree. I honestly, we've covered Nathan Duran twice already. We've done The Deadly Menace and we've done 20 Million Miles to Earth, of which I like the latter better. But I don't know that Nathan Duran is a strong enough director to stand up and say, no, Nigel has the better idea. Schneer, you need to shut up and let me make this movie.
Agreed. I agree, but Schneer had the money. He was backing it. Plus the fact that he had his his big
Harryhausen.
collaborator and helper, Harryhausen, and Harryhausen was directing all of his own scenes already. So
Right.
all of the stop motion was not directed by Duran. It was directed by Ray
And I
Harry.
like it. It's fine. That's
It's
not
great.
the comedic element of it.
Yeah.
That kind of fantastical element, I don't mind. Some of the logic stuff's a little weird to me, but
Well, me, you know me and logic, and
I was going to say,
there were parts of this where I was going, okay, I should have told Tim, just watch the teaser. And then when he starts telling the flashback story, fast forward to where they actually launch and go to the moon. Because then you'd miss all of that stuff with the chair floating and Lionel Jeffries doing this. He's so manic in his delivery about everything. And then once they get to the moon, logic is just thrown out the freaking window. It just doesn't make sense that it takes both of them to open up one door, and yet all the rest of the doors Bedford opens by himself. Why the hell did Cavor want to go talk to the head Luna guy, and how did that happen? Where did they end up? How could Bedford go through all these tunnels and not run into one freaking selenite? Until he sees a giant caterpillar. So there's a lot of logic that doesn't work. How could just the two of them rebuild the entire thing when they didn't build it to begin with? Cavor built it. So there's logic.
and the ship itself, I mean, pieces of it come off left and right. I mean, it doesn't look like it's put together very well.
Yeah. But I do love that design. That is steampunk. That is all of this.
It is very
in
steampunk.
The interior with the padded green velvet walls and with the buttons and everything. So Victorian, so steampunk. I love it. Of course, I like steampunk anyway.
Well, I was going to say
huge
the whole
piece of
thing
it.
actually looks more Jules Verne than it does H.G. Wells. Ironic that Jules didn't like it.
Ironic. Yeah. Well, but then again, a lot of the design elements are not the same, like the railroad ties and the big rivets and all that he says he's using to build the craft. That's not in the novel. In the novel,
okay.
It's a rounded
So I'm
sphere.
judging the book versus the movie. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, okay. So production wise, it is a Harryhausen vehicle.
That's why I'm surprised I never heard of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have heard of all of Harryhausen's movies. I thought this one took me by surprise.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is one of Harryhausen's best, in my opinion. I mean, and I love the fact you get, I think you get to see a Harryhausen skeleton, you get to see a Harryhausen caterpillar, you get to see selenites. The ship itself is Harryhausen.
Yeah, but there's no Cyclops. There's no six-armed Indian sword fighting deity.
Well, that one is a good one in Golden Voyage.
There's no army
Kali.
of skeletons or the Kraken or I don't know. Yeah. But But I mean, I get that it is part of his oeuvre. So it is it is Ray Harryhausen, classic.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think if you like Harryhausen, you
classic.
should. Yeah. I think if you like Harryhausen, this should be on your list to do it. I've got just good and bads or things that, I liked the lunar design that you see behind you, that very craggy looking from the earth to the moon kind of feel to it. That was also so popular with all of the, Destination Moon, all the George Powell movies. Even 2001 to an extent looks like this, with the earth in the background and these big mountains and these huge caverns and craters and things. So there's a lot of the visual appeal I like of it. Again, this was in 1964. So we were not even in the Apollo program yet. We were still in Gemini. Yeah. Well, some of us were. But anyway, we were still in Gemini at that time. And so I think I love that. I like the production design all the way through it. Even down to, I love Cavor's kitchen with the way it's set up with all the instrumentation and the furnace and all of that. I love the selenite design, all the crystals and their technology. So
I like that kind of stuff, but the stuff on Earth looks so much like a set to me. It's
Well,
like,
okay, goes to one of my big keys. And I wanted to mention this to you from the
Okay.
very beginning of this. Okay, it's very unique, and I wanted to research and see if they changed film stock because I rewound and looked at a couple of rewound. I went back and then went forward and looked at a couple of things.
that's
But
hilarious.
the UN sequences, the bookends, beginning and the end,
Mhm.
the going to the local constabulary trying to find her marriage certificate or her name, going to the old folks home and all of that. There's a certain quality to the film. It's very quartermass or
Quatermass.
Quatermass feeling.
Mhm.
It looks the same palette. It, the way they show the police officers and the palette, everything looks the same. But when they go back in time, everything to me looks like a Hammer movie. It's so colorful. It is so
It's very
brightly
colorful.
lit.
Yeah.
It is so uniformly lit on the sets. When she's walking around the cottage, I'm going, my God, there must be so much light on that freaking set to show all the way back to the windows in the back when she walks and gets the tea and all. I was going, and it's so Hammer to me. If it had blood, it would have been Hammer. I swear to God, it just looked like a Hammer movie.
It's not, I mean, I see what you're saying. It didn't strike me as Hammer at all because I'm not really used to Hammer being science fiction. But
Right, but I just meant in the visual, that color palette.
I have visual keys. I will get to them.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I see what you're, and I identify with what you're saying though, as far as the color palette and the lighting and stuff. And it is a British movie. I mean, it was probably filmed in the same studios or at least on the same lots, maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it probably has some of the same crews.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it had similar crew.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that London filmmaking was that huge of an operation. I don't think it is now, is it?
Well, I mean, Pinewood and everything. Yeah. All the Harry Potters. I mean, Elstree and Pinewood and the studios in London have done some great
True.
series work.
And you've got, I'm talking about English productions, but yeah.
Right.
Because, well, you've got all the Downton Abbeys, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not to mention the series is for Netflix, but those could be American. I'm not sure if they are or not, like The Crown.
Yeah. Well, the reason that Jan Reed is credited in the screenplay is because that's who Schneer hired to add the comedy. So all the comedy elements came from Jan Reed.
So he added the comedy to stuff like Jason and the Argonauts too. What little there was. Okay.
Correct. So yeah, but he's, and I love looking up the production of this, the cred of all these people, from Harry Hausen and, Nathan Duran, like you talked about. Not only have we covered 2 of his movies, but he also did The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. He did all of Harry Hausen's movies, basically.
Yeah, he did.
And so did Schneer.
So did Schneer, and then we also you add Nigel Neal in there, who is a heady science fiction writer that we have covered as well.
I would love
we've covered H.G. Wells as well.
I would love to find the original screenplay and see what Nigel Neal did with this.
It's
raw
probably
material
out there.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. That would be interesting.
That could be one of your genre week topics.
And the cast, I thought Edward Judd did well, do you want to talk about cast? I mean, because we can go there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have anything for scenes. If I had to choose scenes, they would probably be the Harryhausen scenes, just because they're monsters and aliens and things like of that sort. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot on cast. I do have one interesting note, and I don't know if you caught this. I did not catch it, but William Rushton was originally supposed to play the bailiff's man in the film, but he was sick, and they had a quick last-minute substitute in that scene. And do you know who that was?
Mm-mm.
He was on an adjacent soundstage filming The Pumpkin Eater at the time.
The Pumpkin Eater,
another British movie, I guess.
Yeah.
Peter Finch is in that
Oh,
scene.
oh, he's one of the cops, right? Or one of the
bailiff.
Yeah.
And he of course was Dudley Moore's comedy partner. And for those of you that, I mean, that's actually probably a generation before me at least. But Dudley Moore and Peter Finch were big comedic actors.
No, Peter Cook was Dudley Moore's. Peter Finch, you probably remember his biggest one was probably Network.
Actually, you are absolutely correct. I had them mixed up. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Peter Finch is, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Right.
Or that's right. Sorry, it's not Dudley Moore's comic partner.
What's his other one? Sunday, Bloody Sunday. I remember him in that too. I thought he was really good in that.
Yeah. So anyway, Peter Finch stepped in and for somebody that was sick.
Yeah.
And he's mad as hell and he's not going to take it anymore.
Not going to take it anymore.
Edward Judd played Arnold Bedford. I don't have a lot about him. He was an English character actor, but he was so, to me, he was my favorite part of this movie because he reminded me of a lot of those like 50s B movie actors that you know, but you don't really know. Like I was like, is that the guy from Creature from the Black Lagoon? He looks like the guy from the Creature from the Black Lagoon. But I looked him up a million times and couldn't find anything else that I knew him from.
He did a few of those that were pretty good at the time, sort of thing. Then he switched, I think, mostly to just British television. He did a lot of British television, but I remember him from, there was some, it wasn't another, what was the other H.G. Wells story or Jules Verne story about a fantastic planet, Voyage, the Journey, the one with the giant bees,
Mysterious Island?
Mysterious Island.
Yeah.
I don't think he was in that, but I associate him with a movie like that. I can't remember what it was.
I associate a lot of these movies, and that is actually Harry Hausen too. That's funny. But anyway, Edward Judd was my favorite thing in this movie, just because I was like, he is a quality leading man for B movies. Why don't I know him from other things?
Very much so. You know what I was thinking was I would have loved to have seen him in the movie we covered, I think last year. The one where the giant tarantula is let loose by the witch or the ghost or the whatever in the room. And, oh, shoot.
What are you talking about?
There's a movie we covered on the podcast.
This?
Yes, we covered on the podcast. And I think it was the one with the monster, with the runes. And Dana Andrews is the lead.
Curse of the Demon?
Yeah, I think it was Curse of the
Demon. There's a tarantula in that? I don't remember that.
There's a giant tarantula in it. It's in his mind, I think, because he's being terrorized by it. But it's in the scene where it crawls into his room, his study,
right,
or whatever, and the girl screams and all that.
Anyway, maybe you're right, and I don't remember it. For those of you out there, if you're confused, that movie is also known as Night of the Demon. One of them's the British title, one of them's the American.
Yeah.
Curse of the Demon, Night of the Demon. Okay.
But
Dana Andrews is in that.
And I don't think he's as good. I would love to have seen Judd in that. I think he would have been really good in that. Yeah, he's got a great face.
All right. One person in this movie that I did not like was Martha Hyer, who played Kate Callender. She annoyed the piss out of me.
But was it her or was it the writing of her?
It may have been her character. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, see,
it's
that's
probably
what
the writing.
She's basically just a one note all the way through this. And
if it was a real Hammer movie, they would have ripped her bodice off, I'm sure.
At least once, which would not have sucked. But anyway, but she's very one note all the way through this, and very cliche for the time. This, oh, please marry me, darling. And and people, read a couple of reviews and they were going, I like the fact that she stands up for herself, and she doesn't. No, not really. No. She really doesn't. She plays damsel in distress for most of this movie.
Well, the minute she goes to confront him for leaving her with the debt on the cottage, he immediately talks her out of it.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh no, you love me. You know you love me. It was,
You love me.
I was going to the moon."
Yeah. Let's go.
Stupid. Lionel Jeffries. Yeah. Lionel Jeffries plays Professor Cavor. And I think in the remake of this, they could easily cast Jonathan Cleese in this part because he is very silly.
That would have been, I hadn't thought of that. That would be a great recast. Yes. Mm-hmm. Lionel Jeffries, to me, in this plays the same character he plays as Pellinor in Camelot. That's a big key for me. Or the dude in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He always plays these eccentric, British, manic, constantly talking under their breath characters. You know, he's always going, mumble, and then goes, I mean, which I found humorous. And as a kid, I liked it a lot better. It kind of got in the way this time. I agree with you. I think the humor was
very, very silly. I was looking for other movies he's in. He was in Lust for Life, that one about Vince Van Gogh. And then there's also a guy in here, another character actor named Miles Malleson. And I recognize his face.
Miles Mellison.
He was in The Hound of the Baskervilles, and he was in The Importance of Being Earnest.
Okay.
Anyway, those were two very familiar faces to me, and I think it's because they are, they were popular in British cinema at the time.
Well, I think Lionel Jeffries was he was definitely the draw at the time of this, as far as, anybody in the cast who was even had, remote name recognition.
Yeah.
I would think it would be Lionel Jeffries. And again, I saw one interview where he said he was basically forced by Schneer to ham it up.
I'm sure.
And it makes sense that he didn't agree with that totally, which is good. From an instinct, an actor's instinct sort of feel.
And then really, I've got the other people in the cast are just minor characters that I don't really have anything about. I don't have not one single award for this movie. I can't find anything, not even a retrospective of the DVD release. And it is not on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list.
Which kind of explains also why you had never heard of it before.
I guess it's very obscure.
There was a previous version of this I found through research. There was a version from 1919, and you can actually look it up and there's a few still images from it.
So they don't have the silent version.
It was only 50 minutes long, but it was a short that was based on it. The designs are horrible. They're really, really bad. But it was a black and white. It was silent, and it was but you can't find the film anymore. The film is lost, but there are some stills from it that are out there. Again, I think my overall about it before we jump into keys I do think it's a fun steampunk Victorian era science fiction look, and there's not a lot of those. So as a subgenre, I think it kind of works if you can ignore some of the goofiness, not only of Jeffrey's delivery, but also of some of the logic that they throw away because they really didn't know. Even in 1964, they didn't really know what the moon would be like. So
there's monsters on it and werewolves.
There's werewolves in the caverns. Eating the caterpillars.
I have one note of trivia that I yanked from IMDb that I'm going to read because I thought it was kind of interesting. You mentioned that the character of Kate Callender is not in the original H.G. Wells novel.
Correct.
Her being from Boston in the movie is an allusion to the Jules Verne moon stories, where the Lunar Exploration Society was based in that city. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they did that little crossover kind of hint.
And again, I think, like we said, I think the design of Cavor's ship is very Jules Verne. That reminds me. I mean, that could easily have been shot out of the ship from 20,000 Leagues, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very
So-
steampunky, like you said. I mean, it almost looks like one of their helmets, you know, the shape of it, kind of octagonal,
Yeah.
or whatever not octagonal, but you know what I'm saying, geometric with the flat sides. And
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a lot rounded. Everything is very kind of, positioned together.
it almost looked like wood.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. So yeah, I don't have, I mean, I really had a hard time finding a lot about this movie online now that you mention it. I do have plenty of keys though, because I was yanking them left and right when I was watching it.
Okay.
So, and my first one, and I've alluded to this, I'll go ahead and go into this, is this movie feels like a kid movie to me, but probably because it's British, probably because of the comedic elements, and also because of maybe the film stock. And the movies this movie reminds me of are Dr. Dolittle, Chitty Chitty Bang
Oh,
Bang.
wow. Okay. That's a good one. I didn't get that one. Chitty Chitty I got. Yeah.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and The Absent-Minded Professor, which because of the whole flubber element and the anti-gravity pace that makes things float. I was
Perfect.
like, yeah, I mean, that movie is in black and white and is clearly an American movie. I don't know if Dr. Dolittle is American, but Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is definitely a British film.
Oh, yeah.
And it also has what's his face in it, Lionel Jeffries. He plays the grandfather in it. But you were talking about these movies look like Hammer films because of the crisp color and lighting. To me, it looked like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
It's similar design elements, even down to her dresses look very similar to the dresses.
Yeah, and Dr. Dolittle as well.
Yep.
So that's what was going through my head that I was trying to hold back, but when you were talking about it, because I was afraid our episode was going to run short for not having enough to talk about.
Yeah, interesting. I would be curious to see about that time frame of when those were made compared to the 64 for this.
Well, they were both made in the 60s, I'm pretty certain.
Yes, I'm pretty certain too.
Yeah. Absent-Minded Professor, I think, was too, but that was American.
But yeah, the Flubber, that's a great comparison. I had that one too. I had Flubber.
Okay. Very cool.
But and I had all the typicals when we talked about. So of course, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, From the Earth to the Moon, Hammer films in general. I also have The Day the Earth Stood Still. Not only do I love it, but that whole little sequence at the beginning, which is that whole international montage of all the newscasters saying we've been to the moon, and the ticker tape going across, New York and everything. That was almost exactly like the montage at the beginning of Day the Earth Stood Still. So I was wondering if Weiss was like going, ooh, or whatever, or vice versa, because this was 64.
Yeah, that came out in the 50s, didn't it?
I think it came out in 60. I think yeah. I also have, of course, War of the Worlds.
I have that, obviously.
In general, not only because of the time frame of this whole kind of Victorian era, early 20th century feel, but also the whole gag at the end. That is direct. That is not in the novel, and that is directly from War of the Worlds.
Right. Oh, they lifted it from War of the Worlds. I was sitting here thinking, is this his solution to all his plots?
No, that is, the novel does not end that way.
Okay, so. I'm sorry, Mr. Wells. I was about to call you a hack because I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to hear this anymore about the germ being the extinction of a race of beings or whatever. Okay.
Well, because remember, in the novel, there is no bookends. It doesn't take place in the future and past and future. It's all in 1899. So.
Okay.
So that's part of it. I also have George Powell in general, his, Rocket Ship XM, all of his references and films that have these kind of bulleted, cylindrical at the time, the way it always had to be, long bullet-shaped spacecraft that land upright in all these crags on the moon. That whole look and approach is very George Powell, too, at the time.
Back to the Wells thing is, I love War of the Worlds. I think War of the Worlds is a great movie.
Yes.
even though there are fantastical elements in that movie, they don't jar me like they do in this movie.
Okay.
You know what I'm
That
saying?
makes
It's, in other words, it
sense.
seems more realistic to me than this movie does.
Oh, definitely. I definitely agree with that.
Okay.
Yes.
And I guess that's one of the reasons why I was a little bit taken aback.
Kind of
by it.
interesting along those same lines. My next key is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Mhm.
Again, set at about the same time frame as this, but that movie is much more realistic, even with, Kirk Douglas singing to a seal and eating cigars and stuff. It's still more realistic than this
you
one.
had to remind me.
Well, Peter Lorre doing no, we got to go over there. Why are we doing this? So
My hand.
I have two that you may like: Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and The Incredible Shrinking Man.
Okay. I love The Incredible Shrinking Man. I don't know about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but
Well, I knew you would like Incredible Shrinking Man, but I had to do that mostly because of the giant caterpillar and the way they shot all the giant mushrooms and toadstools and then giant caterpillar thing. That was one of mine.
Okay. I have. Well, I was going to mention when you mentioned 20,000 Leagues. Also, the helmets look very
Yes,
big
20,000.
and cumbersome, like in 20,000 Leagues.
Well, it's same design, except they had the whole rebreather on the top of them in 20,000 Leagues.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
This is not a direct key, but it reminded me the civilization that lives in the moon, the Selenites. It reminded me of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, when the people lived beneath the surface of the planet because of radiation. And especially in the end, when they go back and the landing of the other astronauts, everything starts crumbling and decaying and falling apart. All that reminded me of that chaos at the end of Beneath the Planet of the Apes as well. When
they've got to get out of those caverns quickly, or they'll be trapped there.
Right, exactly. That's exactly where I was going with it.
Yeah, very true.
You mentioned War of the Worlds and 20,000 Leagues. Another element of this that reminds me of Kid Fair is it reminds me of Land of the Lost.
I got that one too.
They're running around in caves. There's crystals. There's these like insect like men walking around that look like slee stacks. I'm like,
yep.
Did they must have lifted some of this maybe for that Marty Krofft show? Easily.
I've got that as one of my big keys. It's Slee Stack and Land of the Lost. Yeah.
Well,
I totally agree with you there. I also have Forbidden Planet, because when Cavor and Catherine are going to talk to the Grand Luna guy, it's Harryhausen, but they've got those long stretches of bridges with no rails, and then these great giant bubbly things. It's very much like the Krell workshop in Forbidden Planet.
Okay.
I've got 2001 because, and I think he definitely took this from this movie, because when they first land on the moon at Clavius, the opening opens up just like the opening that they fall through. That multi-pinned kind of circle dome that opens up. That's straight out of 2001, or 2001 took it from this, I think. Crystal technology, I've got Superman. We covered Superman this year, and remember all the technology and all the Krypton technology is these big crystals everywhere.
Right. The only other thing I have it's another collection of movies. Everything I've been giving you are collections of movies, so all my keys just kind of got spent. But is any moon movies, like you mentioned, Destination Moon, From the Earth to the Moon?
Yep.
Those were big topics, especially in early cinema before we considered other science fiction destinations. Yeah.
Well, I think you can't watch a Harryhausen movie without thinking of all the other Harryhausen movies. So like I said, we get to see a skeleton in this. It's her skeleton being x-rayed, but we get to see a skeleton. We get to see the whole caterpillar attack sequence. Most of the Selenites, when they're not attacking people, are actually Harryhausen stop motion.
Yeah, you can, even when they're standing still, it looks like they're animated.
Yeah, I did have an issue that the caterpillar, everything based on everything for the selenite civilization is insect based. They have little wings, they have the multifaceted eyes, they have the pinchers, all that kind of stuff. It's a giant caterpillar, of course, but insects don't have skeletons. So it was very weird when they dissected this. They carved up this calf. In the novel, they have those. They're these large caterpillar-like creatures, and they call them cows, and they use them for food. So he stole that element, but I guess to just be cool and to be Harryhausen, he had to leave a caterpillar skeleton, which was weird. But anyway, he left it.
It is weird, and I had not even thought about it until now. But yeah, there is a skeleton there because they picked it clean, and he wanted you to
He
know
has to
that
wait the whole time. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's an alien. Perhaps it has a skeleton.
The last two keys I've got, one is just an allusion to what I said before. C.S. Lewis has said that this is the greatest novel of this genre he'd ever read, and it influenced his novel called Out of a Planet. I have not read that novel by C.S. Lewis, but he said this novel directly was an influence on him writing that novel. So Out of a Planet by C.S. Lewis.
I didn't even know he wrote science fiction. I thought he just wrote fantasy.
Yeah, I thought he just
like religious fantasy.
Essentially, yes. Religious allegory, I think is what and then my last one is, again, one of our favorite movies, Alien. When they get in that cocoon, they look just like the freaking space jockey. They look just like, and I'm wondering if Giger went, yeah, I see this, I use this here. Because the sunken eyes and the way they have that kind of
that thing, yeah, they do. Actually, you're right. They do look like that
thing. Theirs is a snout because the solenoid, but when they get in the cocoon, it kind of looks like a trunk, like in the.
Or it looks like an aviator air mask with the tubing.
Yep, with the tubing, which is similar to the space jockey in Alien.
Right. I had not thought of that, but that makes perfect sense actually. So Geiger's stealing shit from
that
60s
crazy
sci-fi.
Swiss guy. When he's not talking about babies and vaginas, he's stealing from men in the moon.
He is. Well, in summation, did you have anything else before you wanted to?
Tim wants you to watch this in summation if you have kids. Just watch it with your children.
No, watch it in Dynamation.
In Dynamation with your children.
Which is Harryhausen's coined term for his animated sections.
Oh, I did see trivia on that because, there were times in this when I was going, whoa, the matte lines are really bad. On the ship when it's going through space, and then sometimes when they're superimposed, like in front of the caterpillar or whatever. Found out because they also released this in VistaVision, I think. It was more anamorphic. Schneer wanted it shot in anamorphic, and because it was anamorphic, it was much harder for Harryhausen to do his stuff. Okay. So there's a lot of jitteriness to this that you don't see, like with Kali and her awesome arms, or in the skeleton fight.
Well,
everything else.
I think that's another reason then that why it reminds me of Doolittle and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, because I'm pretty sure those movies were shot really large too.
Yep. Those were at least in Panavision, at least in VistaVision, not Panavision. For
I don't know the difference. I just know it means wide.
Wide, bigger, anamorphic. Yeah.
And a lot of color. Yeah.
A lot of color.
Yeah.
Truly scrumptious.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I don't know that I would recommend this movie to people. My opinion only. If you're a sci-fi purist, I would think you would want to see it mainly because it's an H.G. Wells property.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, there's a lot of Jules Verne in it, as far as appearance, and very steampunky. Did he use the word steampunky? Why is Jules Verne associated with steampunk?
No. Well, Jules Verne is because he imagined these fantastical machines created at a time when there wasn't technology to support it.
Okay.
So spaceships, submarines, all of this technology that wasn't around at the time. Actually, I think we ended up looking that up at one point. I think I did. Like, where did that term actually come from?
Right.
Because I don't think it was Verne.
It's a derivative of like cyberpunk, isn't it? I
Well,
mean,
but
they're
it's
not associated. I'm just saying that just like there was cyberpunk and there was splatterpunk and now there's steampunk. I mean, it's like an
so.
era or a style.
Yes. So looked it up really quick. So just and something I really like is a subgenre of science fiction,
Mhm.
incorporates retro futuristic technology and aesthetics that were inspired by 19th century industrial steam power machinery.
Okay.
Steampunk works is often set in an alternative history of the Victorian era or in the Wild Wild West, where steam power remains the mainstream, but it's a fantasy world that employs that power. So let's find out when it was actually first used, that term. Origin of the term. To your point. Although many works now considered seminal to the genre were published in the 60s and 70s, the term steampunk originated largely in the 1980s as a tongue-in-cheek variant of cyberpunk.
Yeah.
It was coined by science fiction author K.W. Jeter, who was trying to find a general term for works by Tom Powers, James Blaylock, and himself, because he had things like Morlock Knight and Infernal Devices, which took place in the 19th century. Yeah.
I mean, they should put Jules Verne in there as well, I would think.
And H.G. Wells, Time Machine. Time Machine is very, steampunk.
Oh, very much so. It's a chair with a fan behind it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that whole design coined by,
So that's funny
K.W.
because
Jeter.
that movie is also very implausible, but I like it. I think it's
you like it better than this?
I do. I like it much better than this, but I think it's probably because I'm more accepting of different time travel methods because there are so many. I mean, some, in one, was it Somewhere in Time, he just wanted to go back in time so much that it happened. In Doctor Who, they use a phone booth or whatever. There's all kinds of different crazy devices. No, actually, it was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. They used a phone booth. But to me, that's more acceptable because there's been so many movies and so many different types of time travel that I can live with the steampunk or weirdness of that first one. That's also a George Powell movie. Isn't it? The Time Machine? I think it is. Yep. That's a good movie.
It is. It is.
And it's not, played for humor. Yvette Mimieux is going to get murdered by Morlocks. We've got to save her. So
correct.
Anyway, so what I gave you my summation. What would be your summation?
I would recommend the movie. I think it's a lot of fun. It is a check your brain at the door sort of movie, but not so much like with the action adventures we've done in the past, but with the logic of science fiction based on the science of the age, of when they thought they were, what they thought they could do or correct or whatever. It was, I do think it has a strong cast despite the comedic elements. I love the design elements all the way through it. I love the design of the UN lunar landers, as well as Cavor's railroad covered cyberpunk sphere. And I just think it's a fun ride. It always has been to me. It's always been one of those little gems that I go, not a lot of people know about this movie, but it's really cool.
When you mentioned this movie during our Quatermass podcast, I had no idea what you were talking about. And you were like, oh my God, we've got to put it on the list. We've got to put it on the list. I put it on the list and you immediately chose it for the very next season.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to see this.
There you go. Yep. So I would recommend it. Tim wouldn't recommend it, but you tell us what you think. Please, we would love to hear what you guys think, especially since we're kind of at odds on it. What do you guys think about it? And let us know. We'd love to.
Yeah, absolutely. You can comment down below, and please subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. That always helps. If not, and you're out in the outer space airwaves of podcast land, please leave a review or share us. Let people know about us. We have other shows if you're interested on YouTube. We do a coming attraction show. We do. I usually lift some of these Shutter things for a little Shutter show, and we do top fives as well. Sometimes if you're into the whole ranking that people seem to be very fascinated with these days. And if that's not enough, you can always go over to Patreon, where we do have in-depth dives to two particular television shows. One is the X-Files and the other is Star Trek, the original series. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can have access to bonus episodes as well. And I guess until next week, when we're going to be going scary again.
Very scary.
No werewolves, but
no werewolves, but scary.
Yes, scary. I'll be seeing you, David.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny